Count Dante is arguably the first fake martial arts master to become famous. Yet before making the Dim Mak, aka the Death Touch, a household term, before he started selling his patented fighting system capable of killing a man with a single blow in comic books, and before walking a pet lion in the streets on a leash, Count Dante was actually a very capable fighter, ready to prove his skills at any time, be it at a bar fight or a duel, teaching practical self-defense and mixed martial arts before that was even a thing. So how and why did Count Dante become one of the most controversial figures in the martial arts history? And what led to his mysterious death involving Chicago's record-setting heist from which 1.5 million was never recovered? This surprisingly true story begins in the 1940s with John Keehan, a boy who grew up in an upper-income bracket family in South Chicago, to Ashland State Bank's president and his wife. According to people who knew him, Keehan was a great student at school, capable of remembering everything he read and quickly developing skills that he just learned. He was also very eager to get the most out of everything, including martial arts, a practice he was about to get deeply involved in. As Keehan's friend Tommy Gregory later described, with John there was only one gear: full out. Before they have met, one day Gregory saw Keehan getting beaten up by two kids and ran in to help him. Together, Keehan and his newly found friend fought off the attackers. But this turned out to be a defining moment in Keehan's life, as he vowed that he will never get beaten up again. He became obsessed with martial arts, in part due to his vow, but in another part because he hardly had a choice. As Keehan described it himself, in those days in Chicago, it was pretty hard to stay out of trouble. Everyone was always getting into fights. That is why Keehan spent most of his time bodybuilding, weightlifting, boxing, wrestling, doing judo, or in his words, anything having to do with fighting and training. After high school, he then joined the Marine Corps Reserve, where Keehan continued to develop his martial arts skills and later told fascinating but questionable stories about it, a trait common in fake martial arts masters to this day. In one interview, he claimed that he killed at least 25 people while serving in the armed forces. He also claimed he learned Aikido from a person named Commander Kramer, and that while serving in the military in the Far East, he studied Hapkido, Tang Soo Do, Mukdu, Taekwondo, Thai boxing, and Chinese boxing. Although, as he added himself, while he was in the Far East, they didn't know what Kung Fu was. They called it Chinese boxing. Despite Keehan actually being a capable martial artist, something that will be proven to you later in this video, the claims he made about his training during his military service are hard to confirm, as the only military records of his enlisted time shows that he reported for training in 1958 and was honorably discharged a year later. One way or another, John never stayed in one martial arts school for too long, as he felt it hindered him. At the same time, he was about to find one of the most influential instructors in his martial arts journey. In 1961, Keehan met Robert A. Trias, widely known as one of America's foremost karate pioneers. Trias recognized the potential in Keehan's abilities and ended up training him personally. Within 2 years, Keehan earned his black belt and soon opened his own dojo, where he already started breaking the norms, a trait that followed him for the rest of his life. Growing up, Keehan spent a significant time hanging out in the African-American side of the segregated city, attending parties where he and his friend were the only white people. He also trained in a black boxing club, acquiring a lifetime appreciation of spending time in a diverse environment. Yet not everyone was as open-minded as him. During the time Keehan opened his dojo, Robert C. Brown, an Afro-American, was looking for a dojo to train martial arts in, soon learned that no martial arts school in Chicago was willing to work with him. That is no place besides Keehan's dojo. As Robert later described, Keehan didn't care what color I was. He readily accepted me and was glad to have me. Brown even witnessed Keehan arguing with his landlord, who was threatening to kick Keehan out of his dojo space because he was allowing black people to train. Keehan didn't back down. Keehan also made the first black men black belts in Chicago, something that his main instructor Trias was not happy about. When Trias asked Keehan to take away the black belts from these men, Keehan told him no way, an answer that might have been the beginning of a rift between the two martial artists. Keehan was also one of the first to welcome women to his martial arts school too. Yet even though he was unorthodox in his approach to running his dojo, everyone admitted that he was a great fighter. Keehan was always welcoming challenges from his students and whoever dared to oppose him. As one of Ki-hun's students described, John would quickly beat them down, putting a lot of emphasis in his hands and clawing, leaving his opponents with bloody faces. Ki-hun also continued to grow his influence in the martial arts world, where his ingenious marketing skills started to take shape. In 1963, together with his karate instructor Trias, Ki-hun hosted the first national karate tournament in the United States, which was also the first big tournament where different styles got together. Ki-hun then, in order to bring more attention to the tournament, in promotional brochures printed out a made-up story that Trias fought once a bear, and also made other fantastical claims. In due part to Ki-hun's excellent promotion, the tournament had a massive audience and was attended by such martial arts stars as Ed Parker, the karate instructor of Elvis Presley, and even Bruce Lee. During the tournament, to further prove his toughness and to make the event even more memorable, Ki-hun attempted to break a brick with his bare hands, failing and breaking his own hand in the first attempt. But then he tried again with the same broken hand and succeeded. Despite the growing recognition in the martial arts world though, Ki-hun didn't stop training himself, and he didn't let his ego get in the way of his development either. When he learned that one of his students knew Aikido and some other martial arts, Ki-hun offered to exchange for one-on-one instructions. And as his student later described, even though it would look bad if people knew that Ki-hun was learning from a lower belt, he understood that you could learn a lot from people around you, regardless of status, if you just kept an open mind. Yet while Ki-hun's martial arts journey continued to evolve, his strange behavior also became more apparent. One day early into 1964, Ki-hun walked into his student's apartment, cradling under his arm what looked like a very large kitten. The large kitten turned out to be a female lion cub that he would hook on a collar with a leash and walk like a dog in the streets. Because the lion tore up Ki-hun's apartment, he then took to keeping it in the dojo, where the teenage lion would walk across the training area while the students were working out. The landlord eventually forced Ki-hun to sell the lion, but his outlandish behavior did not stop there, and it continuously led to a series of consequences, such as the fallout with his karate instructor Trias and his removal from the organization, under a heavy cloud of speculation as to the real reason. Ki-hun claimed that the removal was due to Trias's prejudicial bias against his African-American students. Meanwhile, Trias expressed different reasons, one being the fantastical stories Ki-hun used for promotion, such as Trias fighting a bear story, or routinely lying about his own past military services and other elements of his history. Regardless of what the real reason of Ki-hun's expulsion was, his fallout with his instructor led him only further into developing not only his bigger-than-life persona, but also his legitimate martial arts style, contrary to what was taught in most martial arts dojos in the day. As one of Ki-hun's students described, most karate schools were very traditional, where they would go through motions such as bowing, forms, and have no contact in sparring. As the same student described, you're studying this method of fighting, but you don't want to fight because you could hurt someone. How does that prepare you if someone is trying to hurt you? There was so much bullshit in karate then. It was so fake. Just let's pretend to be Asian. Meanwhile, Ki-hun's school was nothing like that. His style was brutal and realistic. Ki-hun would constantly try to educate his students about the reality of fighting by repeating such phrases as "street fights take place in the streets," or "you can't throw a roundhouse kick in a phone booth." His teaching methods also reflected that. In the early days, when the dojo didn't have any mats, students would grapple on concrete floor. And while part of the class would consist of step-by-step drills of karate and judo techniques, the rest of the time would be real-time full-contact fighting, emphasizing real-life application. To make the training even more realistic, Ki-hun would facilitate self-defense scenarios, where one attacker would be wielding a knife or a gun, or where he would leave only a dim red light turned on and send multiple attackers on a single student. What was even more amazing was that in some of his black belt tests, Ki-hun would even bring his students to a bar where, without them knowing, he would pay an outsider to actually attack them, and granted the black belt to his students only if they managed to defend themselves properly. Yet despite the brutal and intense training, Ki-hun was also very supportive of his students, as in a case when his 18-year-old student wanted to open his own dojo, but was concerned that he couldn't do it until he had a black belt. To this concern, Ki-hun replied, "You don't need a black belt. There's no law that you need one to open a karate school. You'll teach people what you know. What do they know about karate? They don't know nothing. Just open the school." Yet, Ki-hun's unlimited belief in his students sometimes also had a dangerous effect. In one instance, when Ki-hun was promoting his own martial arts tournament, he decided to put his student in a fight against an actual bull, the same way famous karate teacher Mas Oyama fought, saying to his student, how hard could it be to fight a bull? Oyama did it. Ki-hun then actually continued to bring a 2,000-pound bull in the back of a truck. All the while, his student was warming up to fight it. As Ki-hun's student described, he was very scared of the fight, but since Ki-hun believed in him so deeply, he felt like he could actually do it. People streamed to the auditorium wanting to see the fight. But the police stepped in last minute and ordered to shut down the show, potentially saving the student from a disaster. Tickets were not refunded. As Ki-hun's unique martial arts style continued to develop, so did his outlandish personality. In 1967, Ki-hun changed his name legally to Count Juan Rafael Dante, claiming it was his rightful name as a descendant of Spanish royalty. In order to further strengthen his image, Count Dante began dyeing his red hair black and permed it into an Afro-style hairdo. He then started sculpting his beard with depilatory powder, making precise curves and sharp points, reminiscent of the noted satanist Anton Chandov Levey. Dante also took it to himself to change his entire wardrobe. He began wearing a dark Dracula-style cape and carrying a 24th karat gold embossed walking stick. As one of Ki-hun's students described, he wanted attention, and the more attention he got, it still wasn't enough. It was never enough. He looked like Bruce Lee and Prince rolled into one. While such a decision could seem like an act of a crazy person, and while the further Ki-hun went, the more he seemed to start to believe in his own persona, at least at the beginning, there seemed to have been a certain logic to this behavior. As one of Ki-hun's closest students later revealed, Ki-hun himself told him the name change was an act of showmanship. As Ki-hun described it, it was an attempt to become like a character from pro wrestling or a villain that would make him more memorable. Dante's martial art also received some notable additions, akin to his wild persona, especially when he met James Lee, a Chinese master who lived as a monk at the famed Shaolin Temple. Lee taught Ki-hun a fabled martial arts technique called Dim Mak, translated as the death touch, a supposedly deadly technique applied for the use of pressure points to incapacitate someone or to cause immediate or even delayed death. And then in 1968, the newly named Count Dante released 3 pamphlets that would make him a worldwide celebrity. Titled World's Deadliest Fighting Secrets and advertised in Marvel and other comic books, in a very similar way that we see fake martial arts masters promoting themselves today, one of Ki-hun's ads touted his reputation. Count Dante is the undefeated supreme grandmaster of fighting arts. Count Dante won the World Overall Fighting Arts Championship, Master and Experts Division, after defeating the world top masters of Judo, boxing, wrestling, Kung Fu, Karate, Aikido, etc. in death matches. On August 1, 1967, the World Federation of Fighting Arts crowned the Count the world's deadliest fighting arts champion and master. Another ad focused on his technique. Yes, this is the deadliest and most terrifying fighting art known to man, and without equal, its maiming, mutilating, disfiguring, paralyzing, and crippling techniques are known by only a few people in the world. An expert in Dim Mak could easily kill many Judo, Karate, Kung Fu, Aikido, and Gung Fu experts at one time with only a fingertip pressure, using his murderous poison hand weapons. Instructing you in step-by-step for each move in this manual is none other than Count Dante, the deadliest man who ever lived, the crown prince of death. The pamphlets also advertised Black Fighting Society's swag for sale, including a line of sweatshirts, sweatpants, nunchucks, warm-up jackets, acrylic Yavara sticks, shuriken, and other gear inscribed with the Black Fighting Society logo. During his personal time, Dante was also interested in the occult. In early 1970s, Dante approached Michael Bertreux, who was said to have extensive knowledge of Haitian voodoo. Yet surprisingly, he had learned this technique for very positive reasons. As his voodoo teacher Bertreux described, Dante believed everyone had a potential to become a superhero. He was working with inner city kids that were held back economically and socially, and he wanted to inspire optimism. As a result, Dante used the voodoo techniques he learned to deepen his own spirituality in order to help his students find more inner strength. Yet despite Dante's best intentions, soon enough, the tragic event known as the Dojo War took place. On April 23rd, 1970, Dante called the Green Dragon's dojo, known as Black Cobra Hole, and issued the following warning. I'm coming over there, and I'm bringing a bunch of guys to bust your joint up. To this day, nobody knows exactly what set Dante off. Some speculate it was about saving face, someone questioning Dante's ability to hold his own in a real fight. Or perhaps it was because the Green Dragon Society's logo and their mail ordering business looked very similar to Dante's Black Dragon Fighting Society and his mail order business. Whatever the reason was, after calling the Green Dragon Society, Dante called his main students, who also brought some of their students along, and invited them to go with him to Black Cobra Hall to confront the Green Dragons. At around 10 p.m., Dante knocked on large, castle-like doors that were the entrance to the dojo, yelling, "Police!" As the door opened, Dante entered together with 5 of his students. Inside were at least 6 members of the Green Dragon, armed with the weapons that usually hung up on the walls of their hall. One Green Dragon member brandished a mace. Another held what was described in the news report as a saber. According to an article published in Black Belt magazine, no one said for certain exactly how the fight started. But once underway, Dante's top student and closest friend, Jim Konchevic, grabbed a Green Dragon member by his shirt and swept his legs, taking him to the ground with judo's osotogari. As the fighting escalated, Dante's crew tried making their way back toward the office. In the meantime, Dante's main student Konchevic was cut several times as he fended off attacks from blades. Then one of the Green Dragon students was cut above his left eye, an eye that the doctors weren't able to save later in the hospital. After the event, Dante claimed that he himself had taken out the Green Dragon student's eye. According to the published story, the fighting continued for a time until Dante's student Konchevic ordered his group to retreat, screaming, "Let's get the fuck out of here!" The group found the entrance locked, but managed to force their way out, finally reaching the street. That's when everyone noticed that Konchevic was not with them. As one of the students went back inside, he saw Konchevic flailing toward the door, his clothes drenched in blood. It was later found out that the man that Konchevic tossed at the beginning of the battle had thrown a spear at him, hitting Konchevic in the neck just before he got to the door. Konchevic was still able to stumble outside, but then collapsed onto the sidewalk. Eventually, police made their way onto the scene where Dante and everyone involved were apprehended. According to Black Belt, Dante's loyal student and friend Konchevic was stabbed or cut 36 times. He was declared dead at the hospital. In the police questioning, one of the Green Dragon members claimed that Konchevic fell onto the sword himself. Yet the police did not believe the fantastical story, and the Green Dragon's member who attacked Konchevic was charged with involuntary manslaughter, while Dante got away with assault and battery. Yet, Dante's loss of his closest friend and student devastated him. Later, Dante privately admitted to one of his students, "All I wanted to do is the same that we did in the old days when someone was talking shit. Go over to his dojo and visit him. You think I'm such a phony? Here's your chance to prove it. If I thought that this would have happened to Konchevic, I would have never gotten there that night." A journalist who frequently interviewed Dante also noticed that the tragedy affected him. The journalist wrote, "You could tell that the death of his acolyte had broken a part of him that never quite healed." Yet this was not the end of Dante's story, as he continued to spiral out of control and was about to get involved in what is still known as Chicago's greatest heist in history. Following the dojo war, Dante found himself out of the martial arts business. His students didn't want to associate themselves with the volatile sensei. Once a rising star in the martial arts world, Dante was now an outcast. Though he tried to make a go of it, he was eventually forced to close all of the schools in Chicago. As a result, he turned heavily into drugs, primarily cocaine, and Dante's behavior became increasingly volatile. As one of his friends described, Dante loved to start fights. The way he dressed, he knew it would provoke people. They'd come after him, and then he'd leave a pile of bodies behind. Dante was seen dropping 5, 6, or even 7 people at a time during bar fights. Yet Dante became aggressive not only to strangers, but also to people he knew. On one occasion, Dante provoked a friend saying, "Show your girlfriend how tough you are," lunging at him and scratching his friend's face with a signature tiger claw technique. Then immediately, Dante gave a look of remorse and apologized. In order to cheer his friend up, Dante then came up with an idea. He said to his friend, "Where's your gun? Go get it. Load it and point it at me." Meanwhile, Dante made his way in the front of the apartment's window with raised hands, ready to grab the bullet out of the air, a skill he had before claimed many times but never demonstrated. While his friend declined to shoot at him, Dante continued to put himself in increasingly dangerous situations. With his dojos closed, in order to make money, Dante became involved in multiple businesses, one of them notably being an X-rated adult store, the owner of which Dante muscled out without paying a dime. The same owner, though, was protected by the Chicago Mafia, also known as the Chicago Outfit, who were set to get back at Dante for taking over the store with brute force. Knowing about his martial arts reputation, though, they realized they wouldn't be able to beat Dante with fists alone. So they showed up with shotguns. Luckily, one of Dante's friends, a former police officer turned lawyer, Bob Cooley, knew someone high up in the Chicago Outfit and managed managed to set up a meeting to calm down the escalating situation. Dante ended up paying the original bookstore owner $25,000, but then used the same chance to make friends with the mafia during that same meeting. In a conversation with one of mafia's henchmen, when the member of the outfit told Dante a story how they pulled someone's eye out with a fork, Dante sneered back, "Yeah?" as he curled his hands into his signature claws and said, "I pulled them out with these." Over the next 2 years, a while later, he also managed to open a new dojo in a different city. But even here, it was evident how Dante's personality continued going down an increasingly darker path. A journalist who went to Dante's new dojo couldn't help but notice that the dojo had, in one corner, a fully stocked bar with 4 stools. Then, that same journalist was greeted by Dante with a challenge. "Do you want to go out on the floor?" Dante asked, wanting to fight. The journalist declined, yet as the interview proceeded, Dante continued to display strange behavior. One moment he was aggressive and threatening, the next he was smiling and being welcoming. But what stood out the most was what was actually happening in the new dojo. In March 1975, according to Black Belt, Dante was the guest host and some said silent partner in the Taunton Death Matches. The name and intent of the event, the Taunton Death Matches, evidently reflected Dante's state of mind. The rules allowed for anyone to come in right off the street and sign up for a no-holds-barred, bare-knuckle brawl. As the journalist described, the rules allowed for, well, everything. Thumbs in the eyes, groin kicks, testicle crushing, nothing was illegal. Some believe that the Taunton Death Matches were among the first well-known attempts to create a mixed martial arts form like the UFC. To Dante though, the Taunton Death Matches was just an extension of what he'd always taught. The reason to martial arts, to defend yourself day to day. Then, about a year later, looking all rattled and without his cape, cane, or leotard, Dante showed up at the office of his lawyer friend Cooley. Dante's usual swagger was nowhere to be seen. Without being able to sit still and with a menthol cigarette dangling from his mouth, Dante was bloated and sweaty. His friend Cooley was guessing that Dante's appetite for coke grew the same way his appetite grew for everything else he was involved in. Then Dante looked at Cooley in the eyes and said, "I'm going to give you a chance to win $1 million." Around the same time, the Illinois Bureau of Investigation was tipped off that the Chicago outfit was planning a big score. Almost a month later, around 1 a.m. on Monday, October 21, 1974, $3.8 million in small unmarked bills and about $500,000 in checks were stolen from the warehouse of Purelator Security Inc., one of the biggest armored car companies in America, which moves cash around the country from businesses and banks to federal banking facilities. Because it could only move so many tons of money in a day, Purelator would regularly store clients' monies in its warehouse vaults, which some nights were filled to the brim with cash. Authorities were tipped off to the break-in when warehouse staff noticed a smoke detector going off in one of the vaults. When firefighters reached the scene on West Hearn, they found a 15 by 20 foot vault had been scorched inside by fire. The fire appeared to have been started by 3 plastic money bags filled with gasoline, each one lit with a long fuse. Authorities later said they believed the fire was meant as a distraction, while the perps got away with cash, which indeed turned out to be the case. To this day, the Purelator heist of 1974 remains one of the largest such heists in US history. Yet while initially the perpetrators were able to stay ahead of the authorities, a task force soon picked up a trail leading to the missing cash and some arrests were made. Dante though was not one of them, although he was suspected. Dante was questioned in connections with the case and given a lie detector test that he passed. Some believe it was possible due to his training in martial arts and meditation, allowing him to game the lie detector. As a result, Dante was never charged on the heist. Then one night, Dante called his friend Cooley and spilled all the inside details of what happened at the heist. He painted himself as the mastermind, detailing who he introduced to who and who did what to pull off the crime. Then soon enough, the fateful night came. One day, Cooley received a phone call from Dante inviting him to come over. When the meeting took place, Dante looked visibly different. His signature beard was not as perfectly sculpted, his skin's color was off, he appeared even more bloated than before. "I want to show you something," Dante said to Cooley. "You always thought I was a f***off. Look at this," Dante shouted, pointing at a large card box full of $100 bills. Then once the meeting was over, Cooley received a phone message at 4 a.m. on his telephone line with Dante saying, "You've got to call me. What I showed you wasn't real money. It's all counterfeit." Cooley called him back and assured Dante that he didn't care if the money was real or fake. Yet the next day, Cooley received another call, this time from Dante's girlfriend. "He's dead. I think someone poisoned him," the girlfriend said, and the entire box of cash was missing from the closet. Willie was sure that the girlfriend didn't take the money, as he kept an eye on her and she never had any financial support. To this day, about 1.5 million taken from the Pulatory burglary was not recovered. Keehan's death certificate had him named Juan R. Dante, with an aka Keehan over his last name. While we often like to make fun of fake martial arts masters, it is interesting to realize that sometimes there's a deeper story to them. Besides some of Count Dante's exaggerated claims, it turns out he was a pioneer of mixed martial arts and practical self-defense, ahead of his time in cross-training and even of the accepting of racial differences. And while he did seem to believe some of his own legends in the end, in an interview with a journalist, he said, "90% of what I tell you is and 10% is true. Only I know which is true." Then later, Dante changed it and told that half was true and half was bullshit. I think it was part of the persona, to keep the people guessing. You can't have mystique without mystery, the journalist reflected. If you want to see 6 martial arts experts competing in various realistic self-defense challenges, click on this video right here. And until next time, keep owning your journey.